Hello and welcome to 2024 Seattle Seahawks team preview. We got Geno Smith back with a non-Pete Carroll coaching staff. What a weird time to be alive. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, who will emerge as the, if it's a competition, lead most fantasy-friendly RB in Seattle. DK Metcalf, Lockett, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, maybe even a breakout Noah Fant season. All that and so much more here. Give us 30 minutes. We'll get you caught up with everything you need to know about the Seattle Seahawks. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. And joining me, as always, is Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain McFarland. And Dwain, it does come down to what version of Geno Smith we're getting, because that could ultimately decide the fate of the 2024 Seahawks and how much we get out of their fantasy stars. Now, the 2022 version of Geno was a certified dog, going out there, putting up legit top 10 numbers in the sort of advanced, real life statistics and what we care about, the fantasy points per game numbers. Now, 2023, a bit of a fall back to earth. I think the offensive line had a really big, just deal with that going on. Will we get a better version of Geno and company in 2024? Because as much as the weapons are still there, still not totally convinced that we're looking at anything other than a bottom 10 offensive line in the league.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Geno, the biggest thing last year was the drop off in touchdowns per attempt from a fantasy perspective, right? He was at 5.2%. The league average is 4.2 in 2022. In 2023, that number fell to 4%, so below the league average. But I mean, if you look at overall, his yards per attempt, they were pretty close, 7.5 in the year before versus 7.3 last season. Then you look at his just pure yards per game, they were down a little bit as well, but not crazy down. So I think the big thing is can they get the touchdowns going in? And it's probably somewhere in between, because Geno was below the league average last year, well above the league average the year before that. But I mean, I'm hopeful for Geno. I think when you look at him, obviously a guy that was, thought of pretty highly by the NFL whenever he first came out in the draft, even though he slid. Comes on the field, doesn't really get things done. I think he'll even tell you he wasn't prepared the way that he does now. But over the last two seasons, I've seen enough to think he can be good enough if the weapons are operating right, and he's got these guys around him. He could be one of these guys that could surprise us and be, a top 12 fantasy quarterback again. Do I think he's going to suddenly be, the QB6? No, I don't think that. But it wouldn't surprise me if he makes it into that pocket passer conversation that we have. And he's a little bit more mobile than some of these other guys. But at this point in his career, not running around as much as he used to.
He is around that, again, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love area where we're seeing, between 8, 10, 12% of their production come on the ground. Certainly not up there with Hurts or Kyler, but again, maybe not all the way down there with the Goff, Staffords, and Kirk Cousins, where more games than not, you're literally seeing 0 rushing yards. So yeah, Geno last 2 seasons, number 1 in completion percentage over expected. Again, some of the downfield dimes in particular, absolutely beautiful out there. That said, it will be 33. And, the one stat I brought up in our Buccaneers team preview about Baker Mayfield, having the largest difference in turnover-worthy plays and actual turnovers, aka got pretty lucky. Well, behind him, we do actually see Mac Jones tied with Geno Smith. So thoughts on if this could actually be a quarterback competition between Geno and Sam Howell, Dwain? Because it was interesting to me that when we had the initial Geno contract extension, Adam Schefter noted that, it was a great value to them or any other team that decides to reach out to see if it can acquire Smith via trade. And then later he said after the Sam Howell trade, Howell can compete with Geno for the Seahawks starting quarterback job. So look, I think Geno wins the job and everything. I'm not doubting that. I think Geno is a much better quarterback than Sam Howell. But when Schefter says something like that, man, I don't think it's Schefter going out there and just saying that. I think it's probably something he heard from whatever agent or whoever gave him the intel in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly more risk to Geno not, starting the whole season than there was before Sam Howell arriving. I think that's the best way to look at it. Do I think Geno wins the job? I'm in your camp. I think he's going to win the job. I think he probably holds on to it all season. One of the bigger challenges, you already talked about the offensive line. We've seen Sam Howell behind an offensive line that struggles, and that you talk about a drive killer after drive killer, and it comes down to the sacks. It's not so much about what Sam Howell did as a passer. I thought he did a lot of nice things, Ian. I think he made a lot of nice throws. He's willing to push the ball down the field. Sometimes does he take risks that coaches may not want him to, and does that also sometimes lead to the sacks because he wants to buy that little extra beat of time to wait for his wide receiver to come open downfield. But I think as a passer, it's hard to be overly down on what Sam Howell did last year, given what our expectations were to start the season. The biggest issue is his inability to really manage the pocket, stay away from the sacks, and those things, they end drives. It's basically like once you get to whether it's first down, second down, doesn't matter. If you take a sack and you're losing 6 to 7 yards, it's almost always leading to a punt on those drives. Occasionally, a really good team can make up for that in 2 plays and pick it up. For the most part, that leads to a punt. So coaches look at that as almost being like a turnover, and I think that's the big factor for Sam Howell. Looking at Geno Smith, I do expect him to be the starter for the rest of the season. But a little more risk than there was in the past.
Speaking of those sacks, last year, in terms of the best quarterbacks at not letting pressure dropbacks result in a sack, Josh Allen was number 1, Patrick Mahomes number 2, Jared Goff number 3. Number 4 was none other than Geno Smith at 13.9%. Third worst quarterback in that very statistic was Sam Howell. So to me, that is the big differentiator there going on. However, I think one of the biggest holes in fantasy football scoring is that sacks, they're like points and whose line is it anyway, really don't matter, don't account for anything unless you have DST scoring going on there, one of those sickos. So accordingly, both Geno and Sam Howell, Spider-Man meme averaged exactly 15.09 fantasy points per game last season. So don't think it'd necessarily be the biggest drop off for the pass catchers if we do end up getting a late season switch. But Geno virtually free at the end of fantasy drafts. When I say Geno, when I say Will Levis, when I say Bryce Young, Dwain, how would you rank them as last round darts, guys that, again, please, for the love of God, don't go in the week 1 as your QB1, but maybe you're taking as your quarterback 2 and just hoping that, things really connect?
I'm taking Geno over those guys, and some of it will come to the part we're about to talk about. I like all the weapons that he's got surrounding him. I like the fact that we are no longer, dealing with the Shane Waldron experience for the Seahawks. We get Ryan Grubb coming in. We'll talk more about him here in just a little bit. So overall, I'm still taking Geno, and Geno has shown us, right? He has given us that QB1 finish within the last 2 years. Whereas with the other guys, we're still hoping, right, that they can come around to that. Not saying that Bryce Young or Will Levis, one of those guys, can't outscore Geno this year, but I'm leaning into Geno. He's shown it, and I like the overall situation a little bit better.
Geno accordingly is our fantasy live consensus. QB2, Levis at QB25, and Bryce Young a bit lower there. So yes, we have seen it before out of Geno. Wouldn't be surprised if we do again. Maybe not get all the way back to 2022 heights, but with Ryan Grubb's more vertical oriented passing game, maybe get a bit closer there. So speaking of that vertical passing game, 3 pretty great wide receivers to get it done. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. But Dwayne, we had this group in town last year, only ended up getting one high-ish and fantasy stud, and that was DK Metcalf. And again, even high-ish is probably a bit of a exaggeration. He did only finish as the wide receiver 22 in PPR points per game. So last 5 years, which is his entire career at this point, wide receiver 41, wide receiver 10 high in 2020, and then wide receiver 22, 25, and 22 again. We've seen it. We can get top 10 production out of Metcalf. We can also get someone that looks a lot more like a low-end wide receiver too. What version do you believe we'll get in 2024?
Yeah, I think at this point we just have to look at DK Metcalf as a wide receiver too. He's a guy that's never been able to fully open up the whole route tree. He's really good at the things that he does. He can beat you vertical. You can get it to him on a slant and he can house it, and Geno with that perfect pass last year against the Cowboys, just a dagger right away. It was a true heartbreaker. And it's just DK Metcalf off to the races. He's a guy that's very physical. He's intimidating for the opponent. But I think right now, it's hard to ever expect, will DK Metcalf truly turn into a wide receiver 1? I think we have to look at him as that wide receiver 2. And he's given us 3 of those finishes in the last 3 seasons. And we know that he can still give you that spike week production. He is the guy that over the last couple seasons, Geno's gone to more when he's seen the man coverage. And he's been more likely to go to Tyler Lockett whenever you get zone. Now, that could be changing a little bit because we do have Tyler Lockett starting to age at this point. Looking at Lockett and what he did last year, Ian, his performance against man coverage over the last 2 years has deteriorated very quickly. Last year's target rate and those things were still not terrible, but yards per route run was down, and he is getting older. So I wonder with Tyler Lockett, what version are we really getting from him at this point in his fantasy career? And that leads us to JSN. I do think there's a huge opportunity here for JSN. DK's never shown he can be a full route tree guy. We got Tyler Lockett potentially descending. We've got JSN, a first-round pick from last year, a guy that in college showed to be someone that could, he wasn't a deep a deep threat by any means, but he could still stretch the vertical seam. There was things he could do. And we saw it even early last year with your boy, Drew Lock, again, going against the Cowboys in a preseason game. That's the game where he injured that wrist. I wonder how much of that was a factor in the way that he got used in the offense. That just so gross low ADOT last year. I don't think he's ever going to be a super high ADOT guy, but can we get in the range with like a Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, use him in the slot, all those sort of things? I think these are all things that had me really in on JSN. Even though his rookie season didn't go the way we wanted, I find him being the Seahawk that I draft the most in my fantasy drafts and the one that I want to target the most. Willing to take DK Metcalf, very willing to take him, but I do think at this point we have to think of him as a wide receiver too. I wonder if JSN is the guy that could he really surprise us this year and step up to you're drafting him as a wide receiver 4 right now. And I think he could easily be a wide receiver 3, has the upside to get to wide receiver 2 status, but you get him for much cheaper than DK Metcalf.
Tyler Lockett did out-target JSN 122-93. So to Dwain's point, did certainly not exactly resemble the same world beater as past years, just a wide receiver 38 in PPR points per game. First time outside the top 24 since becoming a full-time starter back in 2018. But yeah, at a minimum, hopefully again in this Ryan Grubb attack, we do have JSN working a bit more downfield. Only Rondale Moore, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Rashee Rice had a lower average target depth than Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So again, you watch the targets and it is painfully clear just how little he was being used down the field the first 8 weeks of the year. That said, if you are getting those targets behind a line of scrimmage, would have been a lot cooler if he was making more out of them as a, yak threat. And also when I see him ranking, 79th in ESPN's open rating, I'm not so sure if that can be explained away by a wrist injury. So was underwhelmed by JSN last year, no other way to put it. But again, we saw JSN's reaction when he got asked about Shane Waldron back in March. Maybe it is the offensive coordinator at hand. So I'm with you where I'm not, complete. I've drafted a good amount of JSN kind of around that wide receiver 4 borderline. But, if we are saying JSN versus Curtis Samuel versus Rashid Shaheed, you still going with JSN?
Yes. Yep. The underlying talent profile, the first round, he's a first round pick for a reason. He was great in college against other great wide receivers that he had to compete with. I think there's a real chance that it was a fluke what happened last year. Whereas with Curtis Samuel, I know what he is. I've seen Curtis Samuel for many years now. And could he be a value in fantasy drafts this year? Absolutely. Rashid Shaheed, small sample size. He's done some things, but like Jaxon Smith and Njigba was the stronger prospect. So I am going to lean to him. I like the other two guys, but I am leaning JSN over those two if I had to pick in a vacuum right now.
Wide receiver 50 over on Yahoo, actually going behind Tyler Lockett. So that really is, looking like the best site to go ahead and acquire JSN. I mean, my God, OBJ is going like wide receiver 45.
Where are you getting all this cool ADP information on the fly, Ian? You have a great source for this, huh?
Yeah, and it's like I can go back and forth between ESPN, Underdog, Yahoo, NFFC, FantasyLife.com. Oh, that's pretty cool, man. We happen to work there. So pretty neat ADP tool that we have going on there. So yeah, final thoughts again. Haven't been drafting too much Tyler Lockett. JSN, I'm not going to come in here and say he's one of my guys, but certainly not afraid to go ahead and click draft on him. DK Metcalf, when you can get him round 3, round 4, I think that's fine. Wide receiver 17 on ESPN, wide receiver 20 on Yahoo. To Dwain's point, I agree. I think we have to treat him like a wide receiver 2 at this point, but guess what? He's priced as that, so I'm not afraid to go ahead and acquire him at that cost. Now for the backfield, Kenneth Walker, tentatively expected to be RB1 because that's what he was last year, but new coaching staff adds at least some level of mystery. And Dwain, it surprised me to, again, look at some of the advanced statistics. And basically, man, Charbonnet was better in almost everything, man. Yes, Walker was the leader in missed tackles forced per carry, but the more I just kind of see what constitutes a missed tackle forced by a lot of these, different advanced metric providers, I tend to look at that more like big time throw rate, where I think it's probably more descriptive than predictive. But explosive runs, stuff rate, yards after contact, yards over expected per carry, yards per carry, Charbonnet was better in each and every metric. So do the Seahawks, new coaching staff care one iota about these advanced metrics? I don't know. And the answer is probably not. But yeah, man, looking at Ryan Grubb's Washington backfields, in 2022, we had Wayne Talapapa. Sorry, guys, with the names. But he had 164 touches. Cameron Davis had 126. In 2023, they were much more willing to lean on one running back. Dylan Johnson had 257 touches. The next closest running back had 50. So with the Fantasy Life projections, Dwain, you have Walker going for 198 carries and 33 targets. Charbonnet for 122 and 40 targets. So I'll say this, man. I have maybe drafted Kenneth Walker 1 or 2 times all off season. He goes in that range where we can get elite quarterbacks, elite tight ends. I don't look at Kenneth Walker and say, man, I need him at this point because I cannot get a running back like him later. It's actually quite the opposite. So meanwhile, Zach Charbonnet, I think as we saw in his 2 games last year with Kenneth Walker's sideline, does have that sort of 3-down skill set where maybe we do get, some standalone value, a flex with benefits option, and I think sky high tier 2 level handcuff upside if Walker goes down. So thoughts on the splits and if you've been making a habit of drafting either running back?
Well, we're very similar. I've drafted a ton of Charbonnet, one of my 5 most drafted running backs. Kenneth Walker is one of my least drafted running backs. And again, it's not anything against Kenneth Walker. It's to do with the other things that typically go in that range of the draft. And you mentioned them. I can get an elite tight end. I can get an elite quarterback. There's so many other things going on. I will say when I watch Kenneth Walker play and I watch Zach Charbonnet play, like Kenneth Walker's the more exciting player. I mean, the missed tackles force thing, to your point, it actually is one of the more predictive stats we have from an efficiency standpoint for running backs. But my question is, should we even really be calling it an efficiency running back? Because it doesn't always correlate to more yards. Like you can make a lot of people miss and do a lot of things, but it is actually helping you produce more fantasy points. So missed tackles force overall is something that probably the running back does own, and it has some stickiness year over year. But at the end, like, how much is it helping us in fantasy land? I think that's where it gets really debatable. But I think the thing about Charbonnet that I do like, Ian, that's the most important thing for fantasy is I think he has a 3-down skill set. We've not seen that yet from Kenneth Walker. Not a guy that they've really wanted to put out there on the field in 3rd-down situations. They have when they've had to. But Charbonnet is a guy that, even though I think he's probably not as good of a pure rusher, if you will, as Kenneth Walker, like his fantasy upside is higher. Because how much do missed tackles for us really matter? What we want are guys that can be on the field in passing situations, especially in half PPR and full PPR formats. And I think that Zach Charbonnet gives you that. So maybe not as electric when you watch him on the film, but he can overall do all the things you want. And he's got that ability to be on the field for 3 downs. So I could see, like, if something happened with Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker gets a small bump in value, but somebody else is probably going to get on the field and take passing downs. If something were to happen, Kenneth Walker wins the lottery, misses 4 or 5 games, I think Charbonnet has a chance to be the every down back and potentially lock on to that role, and that reduces what Kenneth Walker gets later in the season. So I like Kenneth Walker, think he's a good running back. I think Zach Charbonnet is just the more complete profile and obviously way cheaper in fantasy drafts, so he's the guy I like targeting from the backfield.
Kind of has that Jerome Ford in him, where if you just look at the top 5 players from last year, you're going to say, my God, this looks like one of the best running backs in the NFL. But yes, I do think Charbonnet, when the coach draws up a player to get 4 yards, Charbonnet is probably just going to get you those 4 yards. Walker might get you 30. He might also get you -4 because he tries to reverse the field.
-2.
So, only other running backs on the roster, Kenny McIntosh, George Holani. Not too much going on here. So McIntosh dealt with some injuries last year, but really does seem like Charbonnet one injury away from, maybe just maybe being one of those league winning assets, as the kids say. But all that cool stuff, ADP, rankings, and just utilization tools can be found with our new premium product, FantasyLife Plus. And accordingly, here's a message from the one, the only Matthew Berry. We'll be back right after this quick word on FantasyLife Plus.
When I started Fantasy Life, I had one mission in mind, really just one: fantasy football and sports betting for all. And what started out as just a newsletter has now grown into a full-fledged media company. And here I am to tell you we're ready to evolve yet again. I'm introducing Fantasy Life Plus. It's a premium product built upon a suite of fantasy and sports betting tools to take your game to the next level. I know, I hear you, really, Barry, a premium product? Okay, I understand, but get this. Our mission has not changed, right? Our newsletter will forever remain free. All of our expert analysis, free. And we will still provide sets of fantasy football rankings for free. Everything you need to be a great fantasy football manager, you will still be able to do for free at FantasyLife.com. But hey, if you really want to level up, then Fantasy Life Plus is for you. Fantasy Life Plus will introduce new tools like our Draft Champion, customizable rankings, site-wide league sync integration, player prop models, game models, DFS pick'em builders, and so much more. Seriously, just check it out. Go to FantasyLife.com to learn more. And as always, may your trades never be vetoed, may your flex plays always work out, and may your Monday Night Miracles always come through.
Thank you, Matthew. And unlike some of the other teams we've discussed, so far in the NFC West, Dwain, we do have some heavy coaching turnover here in Seattle. Mike Macdonald is the new head coach in town, formerly the Ravens defensive coordinator in 2022 and 2023. Pete Carroll is out after 14 years, assuming more of an executive role. 227, 137, and 1 with that Super Bowl victory. So also one hell of a scout team quarterback, as we found out over the years. So new OC running the offense, Ryan Grubb from the University of Washington. I will note that he had a 61.1% pass play rate with Michael Penix and company over the past 2 seasons. That was the 9th highest mark in the Power 5. So again, I have no issues with Grubb. I have no issues with Geno and these weapons. I just wonder if this offensive line can take a step forward. PFF's ranked 28th ranked group only returns 2 starters, which is fine because they weren't very good, but only added a 3rd rounder and UConn offensive lineman Christian Haynes and free agents George Fant, Nick Harris, Lake, and Tomlinson, not exactly moving the needle for me. So thoughts on if, again, Dwain, we have this marriage of Grubb wanting to run a more vertical offense, but if you think they're actually going to be able to, make ends meet there.
Yeah, I do think offensive line is the biggest question. I will say what I like about Ryan Grubb is everything you read about him. You look at all of his stops. He's aggressive as far as like wanting to push the ball down the field, but he builds an offense around what his players do was like my biggest takeaway, just studying the things that he has done in the past. So I think when you look at the Seahawks and all the skill position players, I think that gives us an opportunity that we didn't get with Shane Waldron for more guys to get maximized. Maybe we see more 11 personnel this year than what we've seen. I don't think they'll suddenly be like Sean McVay-esque where they're out there running 85% 11 personnel. I think you're going to still see them want to run the football, be physical, which could lead to multiple tight end sets, different things like that. But when you look at the personnel, we've got Noah Fant, but Colby Parkinson as well as Will Dissly are gone. So they don't necessarily have the guys to come out there and try to run a lot of these multiple tight end sets that we had in the past. So I do think we get a slight uptick here in the 11 personnel usage. That is going to be good for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who we already discussed. It's just going to be a matter of how much. And yeah, the offensive line is going to be the key for the vertical passing attack, though, if they're going to be able to come out there, and really just run all verts, Ian, and see what things look like from that standpoint. But overall, I am excited here because Shane Waldron, you guys have probably sick hearing me talk about Shane Waldron, but literally did not do anything that I liked. Didn't use enough motion, not enough play action, didn't maximize his personnel, ran a slow offense. And yes, Pete Carroll had his fingerprints on that, so he was part of that. We can't put all of that on Shane Waldron. He may have been behind closed doors getting told, here are the things that you've got to do. This is the way I really want the offense to run. Now, within those constraints, you run the offense. I will say Mike McDaniel coming over from the Ravens, former defensive coordinator, defensive mind, right? So we do see this. These defensive-minded coaches will often come in and run a more conservative offense and try to, play a more holistic game, if you will, where they're going to be more willing to win close games. So I think that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. How much is he going to dictate that to Ryan Grubb? We've also seen other former defensive coordinators, like what we saw for the Chargers in previous years, throw that all out the window. Former defensive coordinator comes in, they don't care. They just throw the ball all the time. So I think a training camp's a really big one for me here, Ian, with this team, because I feel like there's a lot of unknowns. But what we do know is that they have very talented skill position players. So I think that the offense, based on what I've seen around Grubb, gravitates towards that.
Obviously, Grubb, achieved a lot with those University of Washington teams. And McDonald has his PhD in Harbaugh at this point, going back to the Ravens years and then even that one stint in Michigan. So I think that, again, these are 2 good hires. If you wanted to go ahead and buy stock in the Seahawks over these next 3 to 5 years, I'd be fine doing that. But Dwain, for next year specifically, 7.5 win total with a -140 lean on the over. I'm taking under, man. And I'll be honest, this is one of the lines where I honestly feel much better about it, even though we are, again, picking each and every one. So, yeah, they added Texas defensive lineman Byron Murphy. They extended Leonard Williams. Like, they should have a pretty strong group there in the interior. But secondary needs to replace Quandre Diggs and even Jamal Adams. And, yes, I do trust the McDonald's scheme, but is he really going to be able to turn around the 25th ranked scoring defense that quickly? I am not so sure. So give me the under. We have legit question marks, arguably under center. Definitely on the O-line, and I think across the entire defense. So give me the under, but hey, 2025 and beyond, good stuff, Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, -140 on the over. So, I mean, that's obviously the way people are betting is the over, but you can't take those. It's tough to take those odds. It is a tough division. You look at the Cardinals, they're going to be better with Kyler fully under center, have more weapons. We've got the 49ers, you got the Rams who've battled injuries with Stafford the last 2 years. If Stafford's healthy, it's going to be tough, for the Seahawks to just have this great season. So I'm with the market. Like, I would go with the over if I could just bet it straight up, but because I can't and I got to go minus 140, go ahead and give me the under.
If you guys want to go test the market for yourself, we invite you to do so over at DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, all new customers who bet just $5 will get $150 back in bonus bets instantly. All you got to do is download the DraftKings app now and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. Whether it's baseball, whether it's UFC, we got another fight night going on this weekend. Loads of options where you can, again, bet just $5 on anything and receive $150 in bonus bets back instantly. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. DraftKings is the one-stop shop for all things daily fantasy, where you can join in on all the fun and have the shot to win cash prizes. Especially appreciate them always having some $3. I believe they just launched another $4 best ball contest. So even if you're not trying to, drive in the $20, $50 streets, they have options for you. So again, guys, download DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE. Bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 back in bonus bets. The crown is yours. Not really any position battles going on in Seattle, Dwain, but we do have a potential sleeper on our hands, and that is tight end 1 Noah Fant, who, as you alluded to earlier, really is now the clear-cut number 1 tight end after not only Colby Parkinson, but Will Dissly also left in free agency. So that's really been the problem. I mean, Seattle over the years, even going back to the, just Gerald Everett days, like they have always rotated these guys, even if there was one tight end in particular that seemed like the better receiving option. And that guy has been Noah Fant. I mean, since being a part of that, Russell Wilson trade, 5th in passer rating when targeted, 4th in yards per target, 10th in yards per reception, 11th in yards after the catch per reception. But when you start looking at things on a per route run basis, that's when it falls off a little bit. So, hey, when I throw stats out here like only George Kittle, Travis Kelce, and Dallas Goedert have managed to best Fant over the past 2 seasons, I get excited, Dwayne, but I also have a little bit of that, hey, Ian, you said similar things about Chris Herndon over the years, and how the hell did that work out? So as much as I do like Fant, and he is cheap, guys, like that is the one thing. Like we're talking tight end 18, tight end 19 on a lot of these sites. Where do you see Fant falling? Where are we getting a little too excited about the guy that will probably finish, with close to 70 targets? Or are we looking at someone that maybe, just maybe, is this year's, not Sam Laporta, because I don't think anyone's dreaming of Fant, being the overall tight end 1 this year, but maybe being the late round tight end that everyone wishes they would have.
He could be a David Njoku or an Evan Ingram over the last couple of years. A guy that was drafted, because he has, in the first round, because he definitely has talent and he has the traits. And then now is finally in a situation where he's going to get to play, in a role that could unlock all of that. And I think Noah Fant does have several outs here. But first of all, like just looking at his yards per route run, even though, like you mentioned, it is a little bit lower, but still it is in that range of what we see from a low end tight end 1. So when I say low end tight end 1, someone that over the last 10 years is ranked between 10 and 12. So that's where he's at, yards per route run, just a little below that in targets per route run. But the big issue has been the route participation. So I do anticipate he's going to have a career high route participation. This is a guy that could be around 80% this year, which is what most tight end 1s are at. And then he's also got outs from a standpoint. We already talked about Tyler Lockett. He's starting to deteriorate. What if Tyler Lockett just falls off a cliff this year? Obviously, the Seahawks don't think that. Like, they gave him more money this offseason, which I thought was kind of wild. I love Tyler Lockett, but definitely showing some signs of decline. So there's a chance that Lockett falls off. JSN, even though I like taking him, betting on a former first-round talent that just had a bad year 1 based on some of the things we saw last year, there's also a chance maybe JSN isn't good. Well, if 2 of those things were to happen, and Noah Fant's now on the field more, and we already talked about DK Metcalf really being a wide receiver too, well, that would suddenly probably mean Noah Fant is a tight end 1 in fantasy football this year. So I think there's a lot of potential paths, because it doesn't take both Tyler Lockett and JSN failing. If either one of those guys don't do well, and then we also have him at a career high route rate, I think there's a real good chance for Noah Fant to slip into that low end tight end 1 conversation, Ian. So I think it's a great call out for you. He is an absolute sleeper. If you get cut off at tight end in your draft, even though he's not going to get drafted in most home leagues, Noah Fant is a name that I would be willing to click on at the very end, even in a 15 rounder.
Goddard, Schultz, Freiermuth, that's like the last guys where I think you can get as your tight end one and not, completely hate yourself while you're going to bed every night. If you miss out on that, yeah, I'll take Noah Fant rounds later over guys like Cole Kmet, Tyler Conklin, Ben Sinnett, Hunter Henry. For me, he is the guy that I am regularly drafting. And I know if you guys are on the best ball streets, like you're not seeing him available, after those guys. But hey, guess what? We're talking redraft, baby. And he is the tight end 24 on ESPN right now. And on Yahoo doesn't even have an ADP. So Noah Fant, the late round tight end of 2024, perhaps. You heard it from me and Dwain. And just final point, again, it's not just that Disley and Parkinson left. It's also that the Seahawks gave Fant a 2-year, $21 million extension in their own right. So really everything is looking up. Maybe, just maybe, their 4th round pick, I believe it's AJ Barner, is going to be someone that, sadly keeps Fant away from getting that featured role. But new offense certainly have a much better chance of getting that full-time role than did last year. And for the cost, which is literally nothing at the end of your drafts, I do think that is more than worth the risk. So takes us to the end of our team preview podcast. And as always, we will now be comparing the Seahawks to a movie character. Because it's Geno and the boys kind of getting their one last job opportunity. Like if this season doesn't go well, there's going to be a new quarterback. They're going to have to take a long look at Lockett and Metcalf. Like Pete Carroll's already gone. I'm going to go with the post-Paul Walker Fast and Furious movie. So Pete Carroll didn't die, but he's just not in the picture anymore. We're still going to use that as a comp. We still got Vin Diesel, who can be Geno Smith. We still got The Rock, who's DK Metcalf, but it's still just not the same. I think we'll still get some entertainment, particularly on the offensive side of the football, but the identity just isn't really there. And I feel like, this is a team where maybe would have been almost better off doing more of a complete teardown. As things stand, we will see what happens. Hopefully Geno makes it fun, but don't think it's quite the same guarantee without Pete/Paul Walker, RIP. Dwain, your thoughts?
Yeah, I struggled with this one, and I'll be honest, I just got a little bit lazy. But I'm going to go with Captain America for DK Metcalf. Like, Captain America is like a really cool superhero. Like, he's very strong. He looks great in those tights. He's got $1 million smile. All things DK Metcalf can do, but he can't fly. Like, he can't shoot lasers out of his eyes. He's got to have a shield to defend himself all the time. And so it's like, really good superhero, but not a superhero. And that's what we've seen from DK Metcalf. He has all these things, but he hasn't been able to take that next step forward to become like this elite wide receiver 1 that we had hoped for. Really stuck more in that wide receiver 2, the second tier down of wide receivers, kind of like Captain America for me. Like, he's a good superhero, but let's be honest, Superman's just going to kick his ass.
Yeah, Superman, even Homelander is taking down Captain America, round 1, no doubts about it. So yeah, hopefully Seahawks fans don't hate us too much after this one. We're trying to be fair, again, going through all 32 teams through this team preview series. Invite you to check out the rest of them wherever you are listening to this one. So appreciate you guys as always. For Dwain, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.